Marcus wiped down the wooden counter of his small tavern for what felt like the 100th time that evening. The Wanderer's Rest sat at the edge of New Terra Colony, a place where spacers, miners, and the occasional alien trader would stop for a drink and a hot meal. It wasn't much to look at, just a converted cargo container with some tables, a makeshift kitchen, and a bar that Marcus had built himself from salvaged ship parts. But it was his, and after 20 years of military service across the galaxy, having something that belonged to him meant everything. The door chimed as another customer entered, bringing with it the cold night air of the frontier world. Marcus looked up, expecting to see another human colonist, or maybe one of the Zentari merchants who sometimes passed through. Instead, he found himself staring at something he'd never seen before. The creature stood about 8 feet tall, with the powerful build of a lion, but covered in golden feathers that caught the tavern's dim lighting like metal. Its head was distinctly avian, with a sharp beak and intelligent amber eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Massive wings were folded against its back, and its front legs ended in talons that could probably tear through steel plating. A griffin. Marcus had heard stories about them from other spacers, but most people dismissed such tales as drunken fantasies. Yet here one stood in his doorway, looking around the tavern with what could only be described as confusion and exhaustion. The few other customers in the tavern had gone silent. A pair of miners at a corner table stared with wide eyes, their drinks forgotten. The Zentari trader, near the window, had his forearms raised in what Marcus recognized as a defensive posture. Everyone seemed frozen, waiting to see what would happen next. The Griffin took a tentative step inside, its talons clicking against the metal floor. Its movements were careful, almost hesitant, as if it wasn't sure it was welcome. Marcus noticed that the creature's golden feathers were dulled in places, and there were dark stains that looked suspiciously like dried blood along its right wing. "Easy there, friend," Marcus said softly, the same tone he'd used to calm spooked horses back on Earth. "You look like you've had a rough time of it." The Griffin's head turned toward him, those amber eyes focusing with an intensity that made Marcus feel like he was being measured and weighed. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the Griffin's beak opened, and it spoke in a voice like whined through canyon walls. "Seek shelter, and perhaps sustenance." The words were accented with clicks and whistles, but perfectly understandable. Marcus felt his eyebrows rise. Most of the stories he'd heard suggested that griffins were little more than clever animals. This one spoke with the careful precision of someone choosing words in a second language. "Well, you've come to the right place for both," Marcus replied, setting down his cleaning rag. "Take any seat you like. Can't say I've ever served your kind before, though. What do griffins usually drink?" The creature's head tilted slightly, a gesture so bird-like it was almost endearing. "I do not know what beverages you serve to others. I am far from my territory and unfamiliar with your customs." Marcus studied the griffin's posture. The way it held itself suggested exhaustion and perhaps pain. Whatever had brought this creature to his tavern, it wasn't a social visit. "Tell you what," he said, reaching under the bar for a clean mug. "Let me pour you something I think you might like, and if it's not to your taste, we'll try something else." "Fair enough." The Griffin considered this for a moment, then gave a small nod. It moved to the largest table in the tavern, settling onto the reinforced bench with surprising grace despite its size. The other customers continued to stare, but Marcus shot them a look that suggested they should mind their own business. He selected a bottle of Terran ale, something mild but flavorful that he'd been saving for special occasions. As he poured, he found himself wondering about his unusual customer. Griffins were supposed to be proud, territorial creatures who rarely left their mountain strongholds. What would drive one to seek shelter in a human establishment? Marcus carried the mug over to the Griffin's table, setting it down carefully within reach. "There you go. One of our finest Alesh. Name's Marcus Chun, by the way. I run this place." The Griffin leaned forward, examining the amber liquid with obvious curiosity. It dipped its beak into the foam and tasted carefully, like a wine connoisseur sampling a vintage. After a moment, it took a proper drink. "This is acceptable," the Griffin said, and Marcus caught what might have been surprise in its tone. Better than acceptable, actually. Thank you, Marcus-chun. I'm called Ethros. Pleasure to meet you, Ethros. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. Marcus settled into the chair across from the Griffin, noting how the creature's eyes never stopped moving, always watching the exits and the other customers. Mind if I ask what brought you out this way? It's pretty far from Griffin territory. Ethros was quiet for a long moment, taking another drink before responding. I am lost, it admitted, the words carrying a weight that suggested they cost something to say. Separated from my flight during a storm 3 cycles ago. I've been searching for familiar landmarks ever since, but this region of space is unknown to me. 3 cycles. Marcus did the math in his head. That would be roughly 2 weeks in standard time. That's a long time to be wandering alone. Must be getting pretty hungry, too. I have caught small prey when possible, Ethros replied. But the meat of this world tastes strange, and there are predators here I do not recognize. It has been challenging. Marcus felt a stab of sympathy for the creature. He'd been lost in hostile territory himself during the war, knew what it was like to be far from home with no idea which direction safety lay. Well, you're safe here, and I got some real food if you're interested. Got some good steaks in the cooler, actual earth beef, not the synthetic stuff. The Griffin's eyes brightened noticeably at the mention of meat. That would be most appreciated. But I should warn you, I have no currency that would be acceptable to your kind. Marcus waved a hand dismissively. Don't worry about it. Consider it professional courtesy, one traveler helping another. He stood to head for the kitchen, but paused when Ethros spoke again. You show kindness to a stranger whose kind you do not know. This is unusual behavior for most species I have encountered. Maybe, Marcus said with a shrug. But seems to me that being decent to folks, regardless of what they look like, is just common sense. Besides, you look like you could use a break. In the kitchen, Marcus selected the best steaks he had and began preparing them. He could hear the quiet conversation gradually resuming in the main room, though he noticed it was more subdued than usual. Having a Griffin as a customer was definitely going to be the talk of the colony for weeks. As the meat cooked, Marcus found himself thinking about Ethros' situation. New Terra was pretty far off the main shipping lanes, and if the Griffin had been flying blind for 2 weeks, it could be anywhere within a sphere of dozens of light years from its starting point. Finding home from here would be like looking for a specific grain of sand on a beach. He brought out the cooked steaks, 3 large portions that would have fed a family, and set them in front of Ethros. The Griffin's reaction was immediate and gratifying. It tore into the meat with obvious relish, eating with the efficient precision of a natural predator, but maintaining enough control to avoid making a mess. This is excellent, Ethros said between bites. I had forgotten how good properly prepared meat could taste. Glad you like it. Marcus refilled the Griffin's mug and settled back into his chair. So tell me about these flights of yours. How many Griffins usually travel together? A flight consists of 12 to 15 individuals, usually family groups or close allies, Ethros explained. We had been migrating to the summer hunting grounds when the storm struck. The quantum winds were unlike anything I had experienced before. They seemed to twist space itself. Marcus nodded. He'd heard of quantum storms before, though he'd been lucky enough never to encounter one. They were one of the most dangerous phenomena in known space, capable of throwing ships light years off course in a matter of minutes. Your flight. They'll be looking for you? Perhaps. Ethros' tone suggested this wasn't something it wanted to think about too deeply. But if they believe me dead, they will have continued to the hunting grounds. It is the way of things. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of one. Marcus detected something in the Griffin's voice. Not quite bitterness, but perhaps resignation. Still, family is family. I bet they're worried about you. I am not family, Ethros said quietly. I am what you might call a guardian. A protector assigned to the flight for the duration of the migration. Assigned? You mean like a job? Ethros finished the last of its steak before answering. In a manner of speaking, Griffins who have proven themselves in battle are sometimes chosen to guard important migrations or or escort valuable cargo. It is considered an honor, though it can be lonely work. Marcus was beginning to understand. Ethros wasn't just lost. It was alone in a way that went beyond physical separation. A guardian without anyone to guard, cut off from both duty and companionship. Well, Marcus said after a moment, "You're not alone now, and my offer stands. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. Got a storage room in the back that's got enough space for someone your size, if you don't mind sharing it with some supply crates. You would shelter me?" Despite knowing nothing of my nature or intentions. Marcus considered this. It was true that he was taking a risk. For all he knew, Ethros could be dangerous. But something about the Griffin's demeanor, the careful politeness, the obvious exhaustion, the way it had asked permission rather than demanded service, suggested that his instincts were correct. "Call it a human quirk," he said finally. "We tend to judge people by their actions rather than their species. And your actions so far suggest you're good folk." The tavern had mostly emptied during their conversation, the other customers finishing their drinks and heading out into the night. Marcus began collecting empty mugs and wiping down tables, but he noticed that Ethros remained alert, watching the windows and listening to every sound from outside. "Expecting trouble?" Marcus asked. "Not expecting, but prepared for it," Ethros replied. "There are things on this world that hunt in darkness. I caught scent of their sign near your establishment." Marcus paused in his cleaning. "What kind of things?" "Pack hunters. Quadrupedal, with a musk that speaks of aggression and hunger. They avoided me during my approach, but they are watching." Marcus felt his military training kick in automatically. He'd chosen the tavern's location partly for its defensible position, good sight lines, solid walls, multiple exits. But if there were predators in the area, he needed to know more. These pack hunters, they dangerous to humans? To a single human, yes. To a human with a guardian. Ethros's beak curved in what might have been a smile. That would be a different matter entirely. Something passed between them in that moment. An understanding that went beyond words. Marcus had offered shelter and food without asking for anything in return. Now Ethros was offering protection, not because it was required, but because it was the right thing to do. "Well then," Marcus said, finishing his cleaning and securing the tavern for the night. "Looks like we might both get something out of this arrangement. Come on, let me show you that storage room." As they moved toward the back of the tavern, Marcus caught a glimpse of movement outside one of the windows, something low and dark that disappeared as soon as he tried to focus on it. Whatever was out there, it was patient and clever. He was glad to have a guardian on his side, even if that guardian happened to be lost and far from home. The storage room was larger than most of the tavern's other spaces, originally designed to hold cargo containers. Marcus cleared some space and brought in a couple of blankets that were tough enough to handle talons. "It's not much," he admitted, "but it's warm and dry." "It is more than I have had in many days," Ethros replied. "I am grateful for your kindness, Marcus-chun. I will not forget it. Just Marcus is fine. And don't mention it. We've all been lost before." As Marcus headed back to his own quarters, he found himself wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Harboring a lost Griffin was definitely not something covered in the Colonial Administration Handbook. But somehow, it felt like the right thing to do. Outside, something howled in the distance, a sound that spoke of hunger and patience and the kind of intelligence that made prey of the unwary. Marcus checked the tavern security systems one more time before settling in for the night. In the storage room, Ethros lay with its head up and alert, amber eyes reflecting the faint emergency lighting. The Guardian was far from home and separated from its charge, but it had found something unexpected in this small human establishment. Not just shelter, but genuine hospitality offered without expectation of reward. It was, the Griffin reflected, a very human thing to do. And perhaps in this strange new place so far from the mountain territories of its birth, that was exactly what it needed. The night stretched on, full of possibilities and dangers, while inside the Wanderer's rest, An unlikely friendship began to take shape between a lost guardian and a human tavern keeper who believed that kindness was never wasted, no matter how far from home you might find yourself. Marcus woke to the sound of shattering glass and an inhuman shriek that made his blood run cold. Years of military training had him rolling out of bed and grabbing the plasma rifle from his nightstand before his conscious mind had fully processed what was happening. The chronometer on his wall read 0347 hours, the deep part of the night when most predators prefer to hunt. He moved quickly but carefully through his quarters, checking the security monitors as he passed. The main tavern area looked intact, but one of the side windows showed a spider web of cracks. Movement outside caught his attention. Low, dark shapes circling the building with predatory patience. Another crash came from the direction of the storage room, followed by a roar that definitely belonged to Ethros. Marcus cursed under his breath and moved faster. Whatever was attacking had either found a way inside or was trying very hard to create one. The corridor leading to the storage area was dark except for the emergency lighting strips along the floor. Marcus activated the tactical light on his rifle, sweeping the beam ahead of him as he advanced. The air smelled of ozone and something else, a musky animal scent that made his skin crawl. He found the source of the commotion when he reached the storage room. The reinforced door hung askew on its hinges, and through the gap he could see Ethros engaged in fierce combat with something that looked like a cross between a wolf and a nightmare. The creature was roughly the size of a small horse, covered in mottled black fur, with far too many teeth and eyes that glowed with a sickly green light. Ethros had reared up on its hind legs, wings spread wide in a display of intimidation that would have been magnificent under other circumstances. Its talons caught the creature across the snout, sending it stumbling backward with a yelp of pain. But Marcus could see more shapes moving in the darkness beyond the damaged wall. This wasn't a lone attacker. Ethros, Marcus called out, raising his rifle. Get clear. The Griffin's head snapped toward him for just an instant, long enough to register his presence. Then it lunged forward as another of the creatures tried to flank it from the left. Marcus took aim at the first attacker and squeezed the trigger. The plasma bolt caught the creature's center mass, and it dropped without a sound. Shadow hounds, Ethros panted, landing heavily as it faced the remaining threats. Pack hunters, very intelligent, very dangerous. 3 more of the creatures emerged from the hole they'd torn in the storage room wall. Marcus could see now that they'd been working systematically, using claws and what looked like some kind of acid to weaken the metal before making their coordinated assault. These weren't just predators, they were tacticians. How many are we dealing with? Marcus asked, keeping his rifle trained on the nearest hound while positioning himself to cover Ethros' flank. I count 8, possibly 10, the Griffin replied. They have been watching for 3 days, learning our patterns. As if summoned by their conversation, 2 more shadow hounds appeared in the doorway leading to the main tavern. They'd found another way in while the attention was focused on the storage room breach. Marcus shifted to cover the new threat, but that left his back exposed to the creatures coming through the wall. Ethros moved with fluid grace, intercepting one of the flanking hounds with a strike that sent it crashing into a stack of supply crates. But the effort left the Griffin momentarily off balance, and another hound darted in from its blind spot. Marcus pivoted and fired, the plasma bolt missing the attacking hound by inches, but close enough to make it reconsider its approach. The creature pulled back, but its glowing green eyes never left Ethros. They're corralling us, Marcus realized, trying to drive us into a kill zone. Yes, shadow hounds are ambush predators, but they adapt quickly to changing circumstances, Ethros agreed. We need to break their formation before they complete their encirclement. A terrible howl echoed through the night outside, and Marcus felt his heart sink as he realized it was being answered by similar calls from multiple directions. The pack was larger than they'd thought, and reinforcements were coming. The main tavern, Marcus said, making a quick tactical decision. Better defensive position, more room to maneuver. Can you make it that far? I can, Ethros replied, flexing its wings. But the moment we move, they will attack en masse. Then, we'd better make it count. On my mark, 3, 2, 1, move. Marcus laid down, covering fire as they fought their way out of the storage room, his plasma rifle sending bolt after bolt into the darkness. Ethros stayed low and moved fast, using its wings for balance as it navigated the debris-strewn corridor. Behind them, the shadow hounds gave pursuit with a chorus of inhuman snarls. They burst into the main tavern area, just as more hounds crashed through the front windows. Marcus counted at least 6 of the creatures already inside, with more visible through the broken glass. The tactical situation was rapidly deteriorating into a nightmare. "Bar!" Marcus shouted, pointing to the heavy wooden structure that served as his counter. Solid cover and limited approach vectors. They made it to the bar just as the shadow hounds coordinated their first major assault. The creatures moved with pack intelligence, some drawing their attention while others attempted to flank. Marcus found himself impressed despite the danger. He'd fought against human military units with less tactical sophistication. Ethros had positioned itself with its back to the bar, wings partially extended to provide additional coverage. The Griffin's talons left gouges in the metal floor as it shifted for better footing, and Marcus could see that several of the creature's golden feathers were stained with dark blood. Whether its own or the hound's, he couldn't tell. "How long can you keep this up?" Marcus asked between shots, trying to conserve ammunition while keeping the nearest hounds at bay. "Longer than they can," Ethros replied with grim confidence. "But it will be helpful to know if you have additional weapons or defensive measures." Marcus mentally inventoried his options. The tavern's emergency systems included automated fire suppression, emergency lighting, and the sonic deterrent system. It's designed to break up fights, but it might work on them too. Sonic weapons can be effective against pack predators, Ethros agreed. Many rely heavily on coordinated vocalizations. A shadow hound made a desperate lunge over the bar, jaws open wide enough to take off a man's head. Ethros intercepted it with one massive talon, sending the creature tumbling back into its packmates. But the attack had been a distraction. 2 more hounds were already moving to flank them from the kitchen entrance. Marcus activated the sonic deterrent with his wrist communicator, and immediately the tavern filled with a piercing whine that made his teeth ache. The effect on the shadow hounds was dramatic. They recoiled as if physically struck, their coordinated movements dissolving into individual panic. Several of them fled back through the broken windows, while others cowered behind overturned tables. "Now!" Marcus shouted over the noise, and he and Ethros pressed their advantage. The Griffin moved with lethal precision, using the momentary confusion to eliminate 2 of the remaining hounds. Marcus took down another with his rifle, and the rest finally lost their nerve and retreated into the night. The sonic deterrent shut off automatically after 30 seconds, leaving the tavern in relative quiet except for the sound of breaking glass still falling from the windows and the heavy breathing of the 2 defenders. Marcus surveyed the damage with a sinking heart. The Wanderer's Rest looked like a war zone. Furniture destroyed, windows broken, and scorch marks on the walls from plasma fire. But they were alive, which was more than he'd been certain of a few minutes ago. "Well," he said finally, "that could have gone worse." Ethros was examining a deep scratch along its left wing where one of the hounds had managed to connect. "Your defensive preparations were adequate, but this attack was merely a probing action. They will return with greater numbers now that they understand our capabilities." The gravity of that statement hit Marcus like a cold shower. These hadn't been desperate predators driven by hunger. They'd been scouts, testing defenses and gathering intelligence for a larger assault. "How much time do you think we have?" "Until dawn, perhaps. Shadow hounds prefer darkness for major operations, but they are adaptable." Ethros folded its injured wing carefully against its body. "We should prepare for siege conditions." Marcus nodded and activated his emergency communicator, sending out a distress signal to the Colonial Defense Force. The nearest garrison was 3 hours away by air transport, which might as well be 3 days given their current situation. They were on their own. "Can you fly?" Marcus asked, noting how carefully Ethros was holding its wing. "Not well, and not far. The injury is not severe, but it would limit my maneuverability significantly." The Griffin's amber eyes met his. "I will not abandon you, Marcus Chun. You showed kindness to a stranger, and now we face this threat together." Something in the way Ethros said it made Marcus realize that this was more than just pragmatic cooperation. The Griffin was making a choice to stand and fight rather than preserve itself, and that choice was based on a bond that had formed between them over the course of a single evening. "Then, we'd better make sure we both survive this," Marcus said. "Help me drag some of these tables over to the windows. If we can't stop them from getting in, we can at least slow them down." They worked quickly to fortify their position, using overturned furniture and anything else they could find to create choke points and defensive positions. Marcus retrieved additional ammunition and weapons from his emergency cache, while Ethros tested various angles of attack and defensive stances. As they worked, Marcus found himself stealing glances at his unusual companion. Even injured and far from home, Ethros moved with a grace and confidence that spoke of countless battles survived. The stories about Griffin Guardians being among the finest warriors in known space were clearly not exaggerations. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said as they finished reinforcing the main entrance. "Of course. Back home, with your people, do Guardians always fight alone? I mean, do you usually have backup?" Ethros considered the question for a moment. Guardians are trained to be self-sufficient, to complete their missions regardless of circumstance. But no, we do not usually fight alone. A Guardian flight consists of 3 to 5 individuals, each with specific specializations. "What's your specialization?" "Close combat and tactical assessment. I excel at reading enemy behavior and predicting assault patterns." The Griffin's beak curved in what Marcus was beginning to recognize as its version of a smile. "Though I must admit, fighting alongside a human warrior is a new experience for me." "Warrior?" Marcus laughed, checking the charge on his rifle. "I run a tavern." "You move like a warrior. You think like a warrior. You chose to stand and fight rather than flee or hide." Ethros tilted its head in that bird-like gesture. "What you do for a living does not define what you are, Marcus Chun." Before Marcus could respond to that unexpected bit of philosophy, they heard it. The howling had started again, but this time it was coming from multiple directions, and it was getting closer. They returned. Ethros observed unnecessarily. Marcus checked his weapons one final time and took position behind their improvised fortifications. "Any last-minute tactical advice?" "Yes. Shadowhounds learn from failure, but they are also creatures of instinct. If we can disrupt their pack hierarchy, kill or drive off their alpha, the rest may scatter. And how do we identify the alpha in a pack of nightmare wolves in the middle of a firefight? It will be the largest, the most confident, and it will direct the others rather than attacking directly until the final moment," Ethros explained. "Also, alphas have a distinctive mark, a silver crescent on their foreheads." The information was useful, but Marcus couldn't help wondering how Ethros had learned such specific details about Shadowhound behavior. Had the Griffin encountered them before? And if so, under what circumstances? He was about to ask when the first wave hit. This time, there were at least 20 of the creatures, and their approach was much more coordinated. Some came through the windows they'd broken earlier, others battered down the fortified entrance, and still more appeared to be trying to dig through the walls themselves. The sonic deterrent was less effective on the second use. They'd either adapted to it or simply committed to pushing through despite the discomfort. Marcus opened fire, picking his targets carefully and trying to create overlapping fields of fire that would funnel the attackers into Ethros' reach. The Griffin fought with controlled fury, every movement economical and devastating. Together, they managed to hold the initial rush, but Marcus could see that this was just the beginning. More hounds were visible outside, and among them was a creature that stood head and shoulders above the rest. Even in the chaos of battle, Marcus could see the silver marking on its forehead that identified it as the pack alpha. "There!" he shouted, pointing. "Big one with the silver mark." Ethros followed his gaze and gave a grim nod. "I see it. That is no ordinary alpha. It bears the scars of many victories. This pack has been successful for some time." The alpha seemed to sense their attention. It raised its massive head and let out a howl that was answered by every hound in the area. The sound sent chills down Marcus's spine, but he forced himself to focus on the tactical situation. If they could eliminate the alpha, they might have a chance. If they couldn't, "Think you can reach it?" Marcus asked. Ethros flexed its injured wing experimentally, then looked back at the alpha with calculating eyes. "Perhaps, but it will be costly, and success is not guaranteed. What if we work together? I draw its attention, you make the strike?" The Griffin studied him for a long moment. "That would be extremely dangerous for you." Marcus reloaded his rifle and grinned. "Ethros, my friend, I wouldn't have it any other way." The plan they formed was simple, dangerous, and probably insane. Marcus would use the tavern's back exit to circle around behind the pack while drawing the alpha's attention. Meanwhile, Ethros would position itself for a decisive strike once the pack leader was isolated from its subordinates. It required split-second timing, absolute trust, and no small amount of luck. "Remember," Ethros said as they prepared to execute their desperate gambit, "the alpha will not charge immediately. It will test you first, try to understand your capabilities. Use that time to position it correctly." Marcus nodded, checking his equipment one last time. In addition to his plasma rifle, he'd strapped on a backup sidearm and grabbed some improvised explosives from his emergency supplies, mining charges left over from the colony's early construction phase. If things went really badly, he wanted options. "When I give the signal, you'll have maybe 5 seconds before it realizes what's happening," Marcus said. "Make them count." "I will not miss," Ethros replied with quiet confidence. They executed their plan during a brief lull in the assault, when the shadow hounds seemed to be regrouping for another coordinated rush. Marcus slipped out through the kitchen service entrance, while Ethros maintained a defensive position that would allow it to strike from an unexpected angle. The night air was cold, and carried the musk scent of the shadow hounds strongly now. Marcus could hear them moving in the darkness, communicating through low growls and what sounded almost like whispered conversation. The intelligence these creatures displayed continued to unnerve him. Fighting humans was one thing, but battling predators that could outthink as well as outfight you was something else entirely. He made his way carefully around the tavern's perimeter, using shipping containers and maintenance equipment for cover. The colony's emergency lighting provided just enough illumination to navigate by, but also enough to make him visible to anything watching from the shadows. The alpha was exactly where they'd expected to find it, positioned on a small rise about 50 meters from the tavern's main entrance, where it could observe the battle and direct its pack's movements. Up close, the creature was even more impressive and terrifying than Marcus had realized. It stood nearly as tall as Ethros, its muscles rippling beneath dark fur that seemed to absorb light. The silver crescent on its forehead gleamed like polished metal. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped into the open, making himself an obvious target. The alpha's reaction was immediate and gratifying. Its massive head swung toward him, those sickly green eyes locking onto his position with predatory focus. A low growl rumbled from its chest, and Marcus could see its pack members responding to some subtle signal, shifting their positions to cut off potential escape routes. "That's right," Marcus muttered under his breath. "Look at the nice human. Ignore the giant griffin sneaking up behind you." The alpha began moving toward him with deliberate slowness, each step calculated to demonstrate its confidence and dominance. This was a creature that had hunted successfully for years, probably decades, and It knew exactly how to terrorize its prey before moving in for the kill. Marcus raised his rifle, but didn't fire, allowing the Alpha to close the distance while he backed toward the position where Ethros should be waiting. The other shadow hounds had formed a loose circle around them, but they weren't attacking yet. They were waiting for their leader to make the first move. At 30 meters, the Alpha paused and tilted its head, studying Marcus with obvious intelligence. It seemed puzzled by his behavior, as if it couldn't understand why its prey wasn't running or cowering in terror. Marcus used the moment to activate his communicator, sending a simple coded signal to Ethros. Now, the Griffin erupted from concealment behind a damaged cargo hauler like a golden thunderbolt, wings spread wide despite its injury. The Alpha spun to face this new threat, but Ethros was already inside its guard, massive talons aimed at the creature's throat. What happened next surprised everyone, including the participants. Instead of the clean kill they'd planned, the Alpha managed to twist aside at the last instant, taking Ethros' strike along its shoulder instead of through its neck. Dark blood sprayed from the wound, but the creature remained on its feet and very much alive. More importantly, the Alpha's dodge had carried it directly into the path of one of Marcus's mining charges, which he'd positioned and armed during his approach. The explosion wasn't large by military standards, but it was more than sufficient to send a 2-ton predator tumbling through the air. The Alpha hit the ground hard and rolled, coming to rest against the base of a communications tower. For a moment, Marcus thought their desperate plan had actually worked. Then the creature stirred, shook its massive head, and slowly regained its feet. Stubborn bastard, Marcus observed, raising his rifle. The Alpha looked from Marcus to Ethros and back again, and Marcus could practically see the calculations running behind those green eyes. Its pack was watching, waiting for orders. Its authority had been challenged, and its dominance questioned. In the social structure of predators, there was only one way to respond to such a situation. The Alpha threw back its head and let out a roar that shook the ground beneath their feet. Then it charged, not at Marcus or at Ethros individually, but at a point between them that would allow it to engage both simultaneously. "Clever girl," Marcus muttered, diving to one side as a ton of furious predator thundered past his previous position. Ethros met the Alpha's charge head-on, and the collision sent both creatures rolling across the rocky ground. The Griffin's injured wing hindered its mobility, but its natural weapons were still devastatingly effective. Claws raked across the Alpha's flanks, while powerful beak strikes targeted vulnerable points. The Shadowhound Alpha fought back with surprising skill, using its superior mass and natural weaponry to great effect. Its jaws were easily large enough to crush bones, and it moved with the fluid grace of a creature born to hunt and kill. Marcus circled the battle, looking for an opening where he could contribute without risking hitting Ethros. The two creatures were moving too fast and staying too close together for him to use his rifle safely, but there had to be something he could do to tip the balance. The answer came when he noticed that the Alpha's pack was starting to move closer, apparently preparing to intervene on behalf of their leader. Marcus couldn't allow that to happen. Ethros was already fighting at a disadvantage due to its injury. He switched targets, opening fire on the subordinate hounds as they tried to close in. His plasma bolts forced them to scatter and seek cover, buying precious time for the main battle to reach its conclusion. But he knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Sooner or later, the pack would overcome their fear and rush to their Alpha's aid. The turning point came when Ethros managed to get its talons around the Alpha's throat, using its superior reach to maintain distance while applying crushing pressure. The Shadow Hound thrashed desperately, trying to break free, but the Griffin's grip was like a steel vise. For a moment, Marcus thought it was over. Then he saw the Alpha's eyes fix on him with unmistakable intelligence, and he realized what was about to happen. "Ethros, let go!" he shouted, but it was too late. The Alpha used its powerful hind legs to launch itself backward, carrying both creatures toward Marcus's position. If Ethros maintained its grip, all three of them would go down in a tangle of claws, fangs, and crushing weight. The Griffin would have to choose between maintaining its advantage and protecting its human ally. Ethros chose to protect Marcus, releasing its hold and using its wings to redirect their fall away from his position. The maneuvers saved Marcus from being crushed, but it also allowed the Alpha to break free and regain its footing. Now all three combatants were wounded and exhausted, but the Alpha still had the advantage of size and psychological support of its pack. Marcus could see that several of the subordinate hounds had worked up the courage to move closer again, and Ethros was favoring its injured wing more noticeably. "This isn't working," Marcus panted, reloading his rifle. "We need a new strategy." "Agreed," Ethros replied, keeping its eyes fixed on the Alpha. "But I am running low on options. The creature is more skilled than I anticipated." The Alpha seemed to understand that it had weathered the worst they could throw at it. It began moving forward again, this time with the confidence of a predator that knew victory was within reach. Its pack fell in behind it, forming a coordinated assault formation. Marcus felt his mind racing through possibilities, trying to find some factor they hadn't accounted for, some advantage they could still exploit. Then he noticed something that made him smile grimly. "Ethros," he said quietly, "do you trust me?" "With my life," the Griffin replied immediately. "Good, because I'm about to do something very stupid, and I need you to be ready to take advantage of it." Before Ethros could ask what he meant, Marcus dropped his rifle and pulled out his remaining mining charges. Instead of placing them strategically or using them as projectiles, he armed them all at once and held them against his chest. "Hey, ugly," he shouted at the Alpha. "You want to know what separates humans from every other species in the galaxy? We're the only ones crazy enough to grab the pin and hold the grenade." The Alpha paused, clearly confused by Marcus's behavior. Prey animals didn't usually threaten to detonate explosives while holding them. It went against every survival instinct in the natural world. But humans, Marcus reflected, had never been particularly natural. The standoff lasted perhaps 10 seconds, long enough for the Alpha to realize that the small human was genuinely prepared to blow them all up rather than submit to being eaten, and long enough for Ethros to position itself for one final decisive strike. When the Griffin moved, it was with every ounce of speed and power it could muster. The Alpha, distracted by Marcus's suicidal display, turned a split second too late to defend itself effectively. Ethros' talons found their mark this time, tearing through the creature's throat and severing vital blood vessels. The Alpha went down hard, its life pumping out onto the rocky ground. For a moment, the entire pack stood frozen, unable to process the sudden death of their seemingly invincible leader. Then, just as Ethros had predicted, they scattered. Without the Alpha's dominating presence to hold them together, the Shadow Hounds reverted to their basic instincts. And their basic instinct when faced with organized resistance and the death of their pack leader was to flee and find easier prey elsewhere. Marcus safed his explosives with hands that shook only slightly and picked up his rifle. The immediate area around the tavern was clear, and he could hear the sounds of the pack's retreat growing fainter in the distance. "Well," he said, looking at the devastation around them, "that was exciting." Ethros was examining the Alpha's corpse with professional interest. A magnificent specimen. This pack must have been successful for many seasons to support such a leader. "Think they'll be back?" "Not soon. Shadow Hounds will not return to territory where they have suffered significant losses without months of preparation. By then, your colonial defense forces will have been warned and prepared." Marcus nodded, then winced as the adrenaline wore off, and he became aware of various cuts and bruises he'd acquired during the battle. "How's your wing?" "Painful but functional. I will heal given time." Ethros looked around at the destroyed tavern with what might have been regret. "I fear my presence has brought you considerable hardship, Marcus Chin." "Are you kidding?" Marcus laughed, surveying the wreckage of his business. This is the most excitement I've had since I left the service. Besides, insurance should cover most of the damage. And I've got a feeling this is going to be great for business once word gets around. They made their way back inside the battered tavern, stepping carefully around debris and the occasional shadow hound corpse. The place looked like a war zone, but the basic structure was sound. With some work and a lot of new furniture, it could be rebuilt. As they settled in to wait for dawn and the eventual arrival of colonial security forces, Marcus found himself thinking about the battle they just fought. He'd been in plenty of military actions during his service years, but this felt different somehow. More personal, more meaningful. Maybe it was because he'd been fighting to defend something that was truly his. Or maybe it was because he'd found himself working alongside a being who had chosen to stand with him despite having every reason to flee to safety. Ethros, he said as they shared what was probably the last intact bottle of beer in the place. When your people come looking for you, and I have a feeling they will, you'll always be welcome back here. This place could use a guardian. The Griffin considered this for a long moment. And if I chose to stay, what will my duties be? Marcus grinned. Keeping the peace, protecting the customers, and helping me rebuild this place into something worth defending. Think you're up for it? I believe, Ethros said solemnly, that I would find such work acceptable. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to show on the horizon. Soon, representatives from the colonial government would arrive to investigate the night's events. There would be reports to file, insurance claims to process, and repairs to organize. But, for now, Marcus was content to sit in the ruins of his tavern with the most unlikely friend he'd ever made, watching the sunrise and planning the future of the Wanderer's Rest. It was going to be a very different place from what it had been, larger, stronger, and with a reputation that would spread far beyond the boundaries of New Terra Colony. After all, how many establishments could claim to have both a human veteran and a Griffin guardian watching over their customers? It was the kind of partnership that legends were made of, and Marcus had a feeling their story was just getting started. 6 months had passed since the night of the Shadow Hound attack, and the Wanderer's Rest had become something far beyond what Marcus had ever imagined. The rebuilt tavern now sprawled across 3 times its original footprint, with reinforced walls, proper defensive systems, and accommodations designed to serve beings of virtually any size or species. More importantly, it had become famous. Word of the human tavern keeper and his Griffin guardian had spread through the spacer networks like wildfire. Traders, explorers, and adventurers from across known space made detours just to visit the establishment where a man had held live explosives while his alien partner took down an alpha shadow hound. The story had grown in the telling, as such stories always did, but the core truth remained compelling enough to draw visitors from dozens of worlds. Marcus stood behind his new bar, crafted from genuine Terran oak and reinforced with crystalline supports that could stop a plasma bolt, watching the evening crowd with satisfaction. At least 8 different species were represented in the current customer base, from the silicon-based rockhounds sharing mineral supplements at table 6 to the aquatic Moranians who required special environmental suits to breathe the terrestrial atmosphere. And in the place of honor beside the main fireplace, Ethros held court with a group of young spacers who hung on every word of the Griffin's latest tale. The golden feathers had long since regained their lustrous shine, and the wing injury had healed completely, leaving only a barely visible scar as a reminder of that desperate night. The quantum storm stretched across 7 light years, Ethros was saying, its voice carrying easily across the tavern's main room. Navigation became impossible, and we found ourselves scattered across space like seeds on the wind. Marcus smiled as he listened. Ethros had proven to be an excellent storyteller, and these tales of Griffin adventures were always popular with the customers. The fact that they were also drawing attention from xenobiologists and cultural anthropologists was an unexpected bonus that had brought even more visitors to New Terra Colony. "Excuse me," a voice said from his left. "Are you Marcus Chen?" Marcus turned to find himself facing a tall woman in the distinctive uniform of the Galactic Diplomatic Corps. She was human, with graying hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested high rank and important responsibilities. "That's me," Marcus replied, extending his hand. "Welcome to the Wanderer's Rest. What can I get for you?" "Ambassador Sarah Hendricks," the woman replied, accepting the handshake. "And actually, I'm here on official business. May we speak privately?" Marcus felt a familiar tension settle in his stomach. In his experience, official business was rarely good news, especially when it arrived unannounced and requested privacy. "Of course. Ethros," he called out. "Could you take over the bar for a few minutes?" The Griffin looked up from its storytelling, noted the diplomatic uniform, and gave a small nod. "Certainly. I shall endeavor not to bankrupt you while you are gone." Marcus led Ambassador Hendricks to his private office, a small room behind the kitchen that served as both his personal space and the tavern's administrative center. The walls were covered with photographs and memorabilia from his military service, along with some newer additions. Pictures of Ethros, newspaper clippings about the Shadowhound attack, and even a few pieces of Griffin artwork that his partner had created during the slow days of Reconstruction. "Impressive operation you have here," Hendricks observed, settling into the chair across from his desk. "The reports hardly do it justice." "Reports?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Should I be flattered or concerned that the diplomatic corps is writing reports about my tavern?" "A bit of both, actually." Hendricks opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick file. "Your establishment has become something of a phenomenon, Mr. Chun. More importantly, your partnership with Ethros has drawn attention from some very high places." She spread several documents across his desk, and Marcus recognized official seals from at least a dozen different governments and species councils. The Griffin Territories Council has been attempting to establish formal diplomatic relations with the human colonial administration for over 50 years. Previous negotiations have always stalled due to cultural misunderstandings and mutual distrust. "And you think Ethros and I can somehow fix that?" "We think you've already started," Hendricks replied. "Your Griffin partner has been sharing detailed accounts of human hospitality, honor, and courage with every member of its species that visits this establishment. Meanwhile, you've been demonstrating to human colonists that Griffins can be trusted allies and valuable partners." Marcus leaned back in his chair, trying to process the implications. "Are you suggesting that serving drinks and telling stories has accidentally created some kind of diplomatic breakthrough?" "Not accidentally. Authentically." Hendricks pulled out another set of documents. "Formal diplomatic negotiations are often hampered by artificial environments and political posturing. But here in your tavern, beings from different species interact naturally and form genuine relationships. It's exactly the kind of foundation that successful treaties are built upon." Before Marcus could respond, there was a knock at the office door. Ethros entered without waiting for permission, its expression serious. "Marcus, we have visitors. 3 Griffin warriors have just landed outside, and they are requesting formal audience with both of us." Ambassador Hendricks looked up with obvious interest. "Griffin warriors? That's unusual. They rarely travel in groups that small, and formal audiences are typically reserved for matters of significant importance." "Any idea what they want?" Marcus asked. "I believe," Ethros said carefully, "that they are representatives of my former flight commander, the same flight I was guarding when the quantum storm separated us." Marcus felt his heart sink. He'd always known this day might come. The day when Ethros' past caught up with them, and his partner might choose to return to the life of a traditional Griffin guardian. The possibility had haunted his quiet moments, even though he'd never voiced his concerns. "Well," he said, standing up and straightening his shoulders, "I suppose we should go meet them." The 3 Griffin warriors were waiting in the tavern's main courtyard, their massive forms arranged in a formal triangular formation that Marcus recognized as a configuration of respect. They were impressive specimens, slightly larger than Ethros, with the kind of bearing that spoke of authority and long experience in positions of responsibility. The largest of the three stepped forward as Marcus and Ethros approached. Its feathers were darker than Ethros's golden plumage, marked with silver streaks that indicated advanced age and high rank. "I am Flight Commander Therion," the Griffin announced in a voice like distant thunder. "I come seeking the one called Ethros, guardian of the seventh migration, whom we feared lost to the void." "I am here, Commander," Ethros replied, its tone carefully neutral. "I survived the quantum storm and have found shelter among the humans of this world." Therion's gaze shifted to Marcus, studying him with obvious curiosity. "You are the human who offered sanctuary to a lost guardian without expectation of reward or service." "I am," Marcus confirmed, "though I'd hardly call it sanctuary. Ethros has more than earned its place here." "Indeed," Therion's head tilted in that characteristic Griffin gesture. "Tell me, human Marcus Chun, what service has this guardian provided that justifies such confidence?" Marcus found himself grinning. "Well, for starters, it helped me fight off a pack of shadow hounds that were trying to use my customers as appetizers. Since then, it's become the best bartender, bouncer, storyteller, and business partner I could ask for." The three warriors exchanged glances that Marcus couldn't quite interpret. Then Therion spoke again. "These are not traditional guardian duties." "No," Ethros interjected, "they are not. But they are duties that I have chosen to accept, and I have found them fulfilling." A long silence stretched across the courtyard, broken only by the sounds of conversation and laughter from inside the tavern. Marcus could feel Ambassador Hendricks watching from nearby, no doubt aware that this conversation might determine the future of human-Griffin relations. Finally, the second warrior spoke. "I am Wing Leader Kairos. The flight you were guarding completed its migration successfully, though we mourned your loss. Your courage in the storm was witnessed by many, and songs have been sung of your sacrifice. What Kairos is saying," Therion continued, "is that you have already fulfilled your obligations to our people, Ethros. The duty that bound you to service has been completed with honor. What you choose to do now is entirely your own decision." Ethros was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out behind those amber eyes. This was the moment of choice. Return to the traditional life of a Griffin Guardian, or commit fully to this new path they discovered together. "I choose," Ethros said finally, "to remain here. This place has become my territory, these beings my charge. I have found purpose in this work and partnership with this human that I value more than traditional duty." Marcus felt a wave of relief and gratitude that left him momentarily speechless. But Therion wasn't finished yet. "Very well, but if you are to remain here permanently, certain formalities must be observed." The flight commander stepped back and spread his wings in what Marcus recognized as a gesture of ceremonial significance. "Ethros of the Golden Feather, guardian of the seventh migration, I hereby release you from all obligations to the Griffin territories and recognize your chosen exile. Additionally," Kairos added, also spreading his wings, "we formally acknowledge the human Marcus Chun as worthy of Griffin alliance, and we name the Wanderer's Rest as neutral territory under the protection of our people." The third warrior, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. "I am Scholar Vex, keeper of the ancient laws. Let it be recorded that a new precedent has been established this day, that guardianship may extend beyond blood and species, and that honor may be found in unexpected places." Ambassador Hendricks chose that moment to step forward, her diplomatic instincts clearly recognizing an historic opportunity. "Flight Commander Therion, I am Ambassador Sarah Hendricks of the Galactic Diplomatic Corps. If I may be so bold, would the Griffin territories be interested in formalizing this new relationship through official channels?" Therion considered this for a moment, then looked at Marcus and Ethros. "What do you think, Guardian of the Wanderer's Rest? Should our people pursue formal alliance?" Marcus looked at Ethros, who gave a small nod of encouragement. "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that any alliance should be based on the same principles that brought Ethros and me together. Mutual respect, honest dealing, and the understanding that actions matter more than appearances. Wise words, Therion agreed. Very well, Ambassador. The Griffin territories would be honored to explore formal diplomatic relations with humanity, with the understanding that Marcus Chun and Ethros will serve as cultural advisors to ensure that our peoples understand each other clearly. As the formal negotiations began, Marcus found himself pulled aside by Ethros. They stood together at the edge of the courtyard, watching the historic discussions unfold. Any regrets? Marcus asked quietly. None, Ethros replied without hesitation. I was bred to be a guardian, trained to protect and serve. But here, with you, I have learned that there are many ways to fulfill such purposes. The Griffin who left his flight 6 months ago was lost in more ways than one. The Griffin who stands here now has found his true calling. Marcus nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and completeness. You know, they're probably going to want us to travel eventually. Show off this partnership to other worlds, help establish diplomatic outposts, that sort of thing. Would that trouble you? Are you kidding? I spent 20 years in the military seeing the worst of what intelligent species could do to each other. The chance to help them understand each other better instead? That sounds like the best job in the universe. Later that evening, after the Griffin warriors had departed and Ambassador Hendricks had begun the long process of setting up formal diplomatic protocols, Marcus stood behind his bar, watching the regular customers mingle with new arrivals who'd come to witness the historic events. The tavern had become something he'd never planned for, not just a business, but a symbol of what was possible when different species chose cooperation over conflict. Ethros approached, carrying a message tablet in its talons. The first official diplomatic reception is scheduled for next month. Representatives from 17 different species have already confirmed their attendance. 17? That's more than I was expecting. Word travels quickly when the topic involves successful interspecies cooperation. It seems that many governments are interested in learning how a human tavern keeper and a lost griffin managed to create something that their professional diplomats have been trying to achieve for decades. Marcus poured himself a drink and offered one to Ethros, who accepted it with a grateful nod. Any idea what we should expect? Speeches, formal ceremonies, probably some attempts by various factions to claim credit for our success, Ethros replied pragmatically. But also genuine opportunities to help other species find common ground. It will be challenging work. Good thing I've got the best partner in the galaxy. Ethros's beak curved in that familiar smile. Indeed, though I must point out that you chose this partner when it was nothing more than a lost creature seeking shelter. Some might say that shows excellent judgment. Others might question your sanity. Marcus laughed, raising his glass in a toast. To excellent judgment and questionable sanity. May we never have too much of one or too little of the other. As they drank, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that night 6 months ago, when a weary griffin had stumbled into his tavern seeking nothing more than food and shelter. They'd built something together that neither could have achieved alone. Not just a successful business, but a living example of what was possible when different species chose to see each other as individuals rather than as representatives of their respective peoples. The future held challenges, certainly. Diplomatic work was never easy, and there would always be those who preferred conflict to cooperation. But for the first time in his life, Marcus felt like he was doing exactly what he was meant to do, standing beside exactly the right partner in exactly the right place. The Wanderer's Rest had become more than just a tavern. It had become a beacon of hope in a galaxy that often seemed divided by fear and misunderstanding. And at its heart stood an unlikely partnership between a human who believed in showing kindness to strangers and a griffin who had learned that honor could be found in the most unexpected places. Outside, the stars of New Terra's night sky shone down on a world that had become the unofficial capital of interspecies diplomacy, all because a tavern keeper had once bought a beer for a lost griffin and discovered that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change the galaxy. The legend was just beginning.